All right. Hello, everyone. This is your lecture for the Chicago School, and as well as Anomie and Strain. What we're going to do for Anomie and Strain is to talk about the key ideas of how social structure, especially inequality, disorganization, and strain shapes crime. So the chapter in your book covers classical sociological thinkers like Durkheim, Emil Durkheim. Emil Durkheim is known as the father of sociology. So he's kind of the guy, how we talked about the start of criminology and the biosocial crime. So criminology and criminal justice, the thinking type, started from sociology. So if you've had taken a sociology course yet, that's kind of like where the tree split, so to speak. And Durkheim's the one that kind of inspired the thinking before that. So the way that this works is an anomie, which is the concept of Durkheim, is it's a condition which norms or the rules of society are weak or conflicting, and often it occurs like a rapid social change, right? So when people feel normlessness outside of in society, it kind of impacts their behaviors. So in that state of an anomie, which Durkheim defined as normlessness, individuals may not have a clear normative guidance, so that deviance can arise. Durkheim argues that crime is normal and healthy in society. So what you think when you think of a healthy society, it's like you want about a 2% crime rate, 2.5% crime rate, around that. That's normal. So what he says is when there is no crime, that means there's too much control coming from the government, so to speak. So what you're looking at is more of like a severe, people are afraid to do anything, which is not healthy. And if you see too much crime, then there's not enough control, and then people are in danger of each other. So he argues that crime is like around the 2% rate. That's good. So what this means is it's because deviance helps reaffirm those boundaries and serve adaptive functions. So let's kind of move on from anomie and Durkheim, kind of that description of why when things are not going so normal in society, people will start acting not so normal. So let's kind of improve this thought with Merton. So Robert Merton argued that crime arises when there's a disjunction between culturally prescribed goals, so like monetary success and legitimate means to achieve. I think Merton's model is a very good one, especially for like how early it came, because he says you got multiple adaptations, right? And I'll give you an example of each one. So conformity, it's an accepted means and accepted goals, right? Legitimate goals, legitimate means. And what I mean by goals is like you want to start a family, get a job, make money through that legitimate job, and then kind of grow as a person through those means and those goals, culturally accepted goals. Like what are the picket fence, etc. Right? The classic American dream is like that accepted goal. So your means a proper job to achieve a proper goal, and this is societally accepted goals. So we have that. That is called conformity in Merton's adaptation mode. Now there are other adaptations in Merton's strain theory called innovation, ritualism, retreatism, rebellion. We've got a lot of rebellion going on right now. Actually, we just had the No King's Day yesterday, and I know that's going to time date this lecture so bad I'll have to re-record it. But it's a good current example of how that works. So let's go down them. Innovation. So what the innovation is, the accepted cultural goals. So they're still after that picket fence. They're still after that family. They're still after monetary success. They're still after just kind of achieving, the Ferrari, right? They want the big shiny car. They want the gold and the jewelry, and they want the nice house, etc., right? But the accepted legitimate means is not there. So this is called innovation, and what you're seeing here is you're using a legal means to reach the goal. So what this means is this is like the classic criminal, right? The person, the drug dealer, for example, So let's say they're selling cocaine, and that's illegal. But the reason why they're selling cocaine is, of course, they want nice things that are socially acceptable nice things. Now, some of these things are not socially acceptable nice things, and that's kind of, we need to get into a wider definition of it. That's the idea of the innovation. So let me take this off. I don't think I have a need for the sound bar. By the way, it's a sound bar. So ritualism, which is the goal's not there, the accepted goals, but the means to get there is. So you reject those goals but rigidly follow means. So you're just kind of going through the motions of life. And this is kind of like one of the harder ones to explain, but the best way to explain this is like a depressed person. Okay, so now we're getting outside of crime. So again, the innovation and the rebellion is what we're going to be doing. We can do retreatism too, but ritualism is more like clinical depression. It's more like mental illness that impacts those acceptance of those goals. So you reject goals. You reject another way is there's other things as well, but subcultures and societies will reject cultural goals, but go through means instead. So you see these in communes where they're kind of like going through the flows of socially accepted, goals of society, means rather, because they got to produce to eat. But the goals aren't quite there compared to everyone else. That's ritualism. And a good example of ritualism is, dear Lord, what's his name? You can I don't go over notes on this. It's just off the top of my head. It's correct, but it's off the top of my head. Dear Lord, the Kool-Aid guy. I'll have to Google it. 1 second. God, I forgot a name. Mass suicide. Jonestown. So you remember Jim Jones? That's the guy. That's the name I was looking for. Is Jim Jones, where he pulled a bunch of people together and they kind of followed through like the motions of society, but the goals were very different. That's called ritualism. So if you haven't heard of Jim Jones, go check Jim Jones out. Jonestown Massacre is a mass suicide using he convinced everyone to poison themselves and kill themselves. And there's a reason why to that, but drink the Kool-Aid. They love drinking the Kool-Aid. That's where that comes from. If you didn't know. So next we have retreatism, which is withdrawals. So retreatism is no goals, no means, and what it is like society dropouts. So mass drug addicts and vagrants. And what I mean is like if you go down to Skid Row in LA, you'll see a lot of retreatism, and that's like severe retreatism where the addiction's so strong they're just homeless. And there's a lot of people working on that, but we're not going to cover that too much. If you want to talk about that, there is in fact drug abuse and all that, but we're just in the theory right now, and there are plenty of theories that describe addiction that cover this retreatism. But just kind of know that retreatism is people that drop out of society essentially. And like I said, one of the best ways to describe this is homelessness with the compounding of drug addiction or mental illness as a cause of that homelessness. So rebellion. Right now we see a lot of rebellion right now with counterculture and revolutionary acts. It's pretty. What it is you reject the goals currently that's established, and you reject the means currently to establish, and you want to replace those. You see a lot of protests, right? You see that. So that is Merton's strain theory, and people adapt in various ways when they experience strain, and that's the way people adapt when they experience strain is what he was arguing. So let's move on to Agnew, and I want to discuss Agnew's general strain. Agnew came up with general strain in 1992, and Agnew's still alive today. I've actually met Agnew at a criminal justice conference and spoke with him. So he's out, and as far as I know, still alive. I spoke with him, I guess it was 7 years ago. So it's been a minute, about more like 6. So general strain producing source, Agnew identified these 3 major sources. One is the failure to achieve positive value goals, including disjunction between expectations and actual outcomes. net perception of what that would be fear or adjusted outcome, actual outcomes. So if you look at Agnew's first source of strain, it's basically a direct quote of Merton's. Merton's his he's talking about Merton's innovation is what he's talking about. So that being said, his first one is, instead of his failure to you fail to achieve something that you value, right? And then you experience strain. Okay. The second one is the removal of a positive value stimuli that the actor already possesses. So you experience strain when you remove something that someone values. So this can include a loved one if they die. Okay. Now we're starting to get into like depression, right? We covered depression under Merton. Or like you break up with someone, or you just lose, someone steals something from you, right? This can experience in different ways, but you lose something. That is the second source of strain, is you lose something that you value. The first one is you don't get something that you want. And the third one is a presentation with a noxious or negatively valued stimulus, such as abuse. So the third is if someone is actively taking advantage of you, hitting you, causing you discomfort. So those are the three sources of strain from Agnew. To put in English-speaking terms, is you don't get something that you want through any means that causes that strain. You lose something that you love, or someone is hurting you in some means. And that's the basic way to discuss strain. So that being said, we can look further into this by going forward. So we covered, those are the three main sockets of those strain theories, is Durkheim, Merton, Agnew. I would put those into the three paths. So what's wrong with strain is the biggest thing about strain is it's very hard to define. Now, like I said, I gave very general definitions to it, but when you're actively measuring these things to test, let's say, how do you measure stress, right? Well, you could say on a scale of 1 through 10, how stressed are you? And that does do the trick, but different people have different definitions of what a 7 in stress is, just like different people have different definitions of what a 7 in pain is. So that ordinal scaling is what it's called. It can be a little fuzzy, so that leads to a little bit of a hard measurement. The other is there's more weaknesses. That is, so it's to account for different strains. So you have economic strain or presentation negative abuse. So presentation, what is that presentation? And people will react differently to a presentation of negative stimuli, for example, or bullying or abuse, and you kind of got to define even further holes into that. So strain theories are too focused on what you call lower class crime. They may under account for white collar or corporate crime. So generally, what it means is like street crime, right? Strain's really good for defining street crime, but when you get into white collar crime, where people already have a lot of money, or people have good money, strain kind of starts to fall apart just a little bit. But there's white collar crime theories you can do, and this is why there's so many different theories to talk about. So strain theories don't always explain why many people under strain do not commit crime, and of course there's people under strain that don't commit crime, right? So what's the reason for that? And the argument is, if you're under strain, you have higher odds of committing crime rather than you won't or you will. So let's move on to the Chicago School, and then talk about the Chicago School. So what's the Chicago School about? So Chicago School introduces a concept called social disorganization. And what social disorganization is, if you look at the white screen I've presented over here, make that line a bit thicker, is you have cities in the United States, okay? Now, mind my bad circles. This might be in your book, this little circle that I'm drawing out here. So this way it works is, it's called concentric zones. It's called concentric zones, and This was come about before Shaw and McKay's work. So they studied crime and delinquency in Chicago's neighborhoods, and this concentric zone model. The city is organized in range. You have transitional zones, areas with high turnover, poverty, and mixed rates that have more delinquency. So you have your transition zones right here, and gosh, that is such bad handwriting. But there's a transition zone, and what they say is this transition zone right here is a area of high movement, because people will go back and forth between the outer parts of the city where people live. And if you imagine Louisville as a city, right, you kind of start seeing how this works. So you got your area of transition where crime's a little higher or way higher, and then you got the areas that people live where more richer people live, more wealthier people live. So let's break this down into Louisville real quick. So right here we have East Louisville, or the suburbs out here. Okay, so like St. Matthews, etc. And then you got here where you're kind of driving into the city. This is like I-264, those neighborhoods coming in, and then bam, you have the area transition. Now, this is when you arrive inside the city or around the areas that people work in or live in because they need to live closer to the work. The argument here is that people in this area are poor and need access, so you start seeing things come from strain, even where those folks that lack transportation, those folks that don't have a lot of means to achieve their goals, they will start to commit crimes in this area. And as they succeed, folks will start moving outward to suburbs. So what ends up happening is you have this really criminally tight zone in inner cities. And if you look at any kind of geocrime maps on a lot of cities, you start seeing this pop up. Now, it's not always in the dead center of the city, right? But each city has its own little crime hotspots that you can look up and you can take a look at. And you'll notice that people that have appropriate goals and means will often run from these parts of the city and will move outwardly, and that's the establishment of suburbs. Like I said, the St. Matthews and the U of L area. That's like the two big extremes. In the west end of Louisville, where the crime's a little bit more, crime is higher. So yeah, around University of Louisville is a socially disorganized place. If you don't believe me, there's a gas station that when I went to the U of L, we called the Grab and Stab, and it's next to the Dollar General store. Just go take a look at it and look at the buildings in the area around. You'll see a lot of social deterioration. And if you go up and down Dixie Highway towards the end of downtown, you start seeing more and more socially disorganized buildings as well, that have higher crime rates around them. So you can go out and look around for yourself, and it will confirm this theory. That's concentric zone. Collective efficacy is a more modern concept. It's the degree which neighbors trust each other, intervene for common good. High collective efficacy is lower crime. And I'll just give you an example of this. It just happened to me. The neighborhood I live in, which is in South Louisville, so it's not like super downtown, but it's far enough away. I was walking my dog, and two pit bulls got loose, and they had me surrounded. This just happened to me yesterday. So it's two pits, and I have a corgi, and come here. I'll show you the corgi in question. I think I've already showed you all one, but come here. Here is the corgi in question. Oh, you're heavy. All 30 pounds of corgi. This is a corgi in question, and let's make sure that you can see her. Yes, there you can see her. You can see her just fine. All right, let me let her down without hurting her. She's not the most graceful thing in the world. All right. So, what ended up happening is these two dogs, these pit bulls, got loose, and they were meaning to attack my corgi. So I had to pick her up, but I was still kind of in trouble because they were starting to zoom around me. And one of my neighbors actually came outside from their house to help me out, and that is what you call high collective efficacy, because people are willing to help each other in a neighborhood because they are closer to each other, because we know each other. That is collective efficacy. So it's the degrees which neighbors trust each other. If you trust your neighbors, then you live in a good neighborhood, so there's going to be lower crime in that neighborhood. Hopefully that makes sense. Cultural transmission and cultural conflict. So delinquent values passed from one generation to the next is that cultural transmission is what it's called. And then you got Sellin's theory, when different theories and groups and societies have different norms, their values clash, producing crimes. So what it's saying here is more diverse neighborhoods produce more anomie, produce more difference of opinion, so people don't talk to each other as much. This is why you get to that model of urban areas are more anonymous and people don't talk to each other as much. So that's one of the reasons why people, that's one of the explanations of urban crime is like people just don't talk to each other and they don't help each other as much. Whereas like when you have a more homogenous area like the country, you'll see crime in the country is very different than crime in the city. There's crime in the country, don't get me wrong, but it's different types of crime and different means of crime than urban crime, which leads me to the point of Shaw McKay's theory of social disorganization in concentric zones. It's an urban theory, so it only really applies in the urban sense because it looks at people not communicating with each other, people not trusting each other, and you're kind of like on your own in the city. Now there are outreach groups and support groups in the city, but it's not the same as like a country situation where everyone knows everyone's names and it's hard to do anything without catching a reputation. Whereas like the people in a city, you probably don't know anybody a block down from you. You might, but the further blocks you get, the less likely you are to know folks on those blocks. And some people don't even know their neighbors. Whereas in the country, everyone knows everybody in the whole county. And that is the difference in that. So they call the Southerners Code of Streets. They focus on subcultures to develop distinct values and disadvantaged areas, the toughness, the respect, and reputation. And the subcultural theories, some subcultures adapt to strain differently, not via innovation, but via redefining those goals to hit with the subcultural goals. So that is the social disorganization and Sean McKay and the Chicago School in a nutshell. That is strain in a nutshell. Hopefully you found this helpful, and I'll see you on the next lecture.